Joseph Smith, the Brides in the Bath Murderer. 1897. Great Britain was celebrating Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, marking her 60 years on the throne. After a year in prison, Joseph Smith was let out of Wormwood Scrubs jail. For him it was time to start a new life, so he travelled to Leicester and opened a bread shop under a new name of George Olive Love. He looked every bit the part of the distinguished shopkeeper with his military bearing and well-trimmed moustache. He soon noticed 18-year-old Caroline Thornhill, and within weeks they had married. Then, when his bakery business went bust, he and his bride moved back to London. Once there, he set her to work as a housemaid, but a housemaid's wages weren't enough for him, and he had his new bride steal from her employees anything of value that he could pawn. The couple then moved from town to town, with Caroline stealing from the houses she worked at, until in Eastbourne, a pawnbroker became suspicious when Caroline tried to pawn some silver she had stolen from a house there. Joseph Smith, still using the alias Olive Love, fled back to London as soon as she was caught, and Caroline was sentenced to a year in prison. She soon realised what a cad her husband was and vowed to end their relationship. Smith had returned to London and moved into a boarding house and married the landlady bigamously so that he could live there rent-free. After being released from prison, Caroline also made her way to London and saw Smith walking down Oxford Street. She immediately contacted a police constable and had Smith arrested. In January 1901, he was charged with receiving stolen goods and sentenced to 2 years hard labour in Lewes jail. Once released, he found Caroline had emigrated to Canada, although they still remained legally married. Returning to London and back to the boarding house, he began to beat his bigamous wife, and she then decided to end their relationship. For the next few years, Smith married and ditched a string of ladies, having closed their savings accounts and fled with the money. In 1908, he moved to Bristol, where he opened a furniture shop. He then hired a housekeeper, Edith Pegler, and married her, but began travelling around the country again on the pretext of business. During this time, he married and fleeced a number of women. In 1910, under the alias Henry Williams, Smith married a girl named Bessie Mundy. After fleecing her of her money, he had fled, but in 1912, in Weston-super-Mare, while walking along the promenade, Bessie spotted her missing husband. When she called out to him, he turned and began spinning her a tale of how he thought he had venereal disease and had fled so as not to pass it on to her. But on finding out he didn't have it, had searched for her and heard she was in Weston-super-Mare. The ruse worked, and Bessie was delighted to have her husband back. They visited a solicitor and drew up wills, leaving everything to each other. The solicitor thought this a bit odd, as Smith was penniless and Bessie had over £2,000. The couple travelled to Kent, where they rented a small house. The house had no bath, so Smith bought one and had it delivered. The next day, Smith took Bessie to the doctors, explaining that she had blacked out during a fit. The doctor found this strange, as she had no history of fits, and suggested a sedative. A few days later, Smith called again on the doctor, explaining his wife had had a second fit. Again, a sedative was given. The next day, Smith called for the doctor to come quick, as he had found his wife dead in the bath. The doctor arrived to find Bessie naked in the bath with her head half submerged. Smith explained he had gone out to buy some fish for breakfast and had returned to find his wife dead. At the inquest into her death, a verdict of accidental death was pronounced. Smith then had her buried in a pauper's grave and collected the money from her will. In 1913, Smith moved to Southsea. He had not been there long when he met and married Alice Burnham, the daughter of a well-to-do fruit farmer. Within days, he had insured her life for £500 and moved money from her savings account into his own. By the end of the year, he had persuaded her to make a will, with him as sole beneficiary. The couple then went to Blackpool for a late honeymoon and searched for somewhere to stay, with Smith making sure the accommodation had a bath. On the 12th of December, Smith came to the lodgings with some eggs he had popped out for while his wife took a bath, claiming he had bought them for breakfast the next day. He went up to see his wife and then shouted from the landing for someone to call a doctor, as his wife appeared dead. Dr. Billing came and found Alice dead in the bath. Once again, a verdict of accidental death from a fit in the bath was reached, and Alice was buried in a pauper's grave, and Smith collected £600 from her will. Smith's next bride to die was Margaret Lofty. They had met in Bristol when Smith was posing as John Lloyd. They were married in December 1914. The couple moved straight up to London and got lodgings in Highgate. On the first day there, Margaret took a bath. Smith popped out and returned shortly, saying he had gone to buy some tomatoes for Margaret's supper. He went upstairs to see her, then called out that his wife of one day was dead. The inquest into Margaret's death was held, but had to be adjourned as a witness was ill, so Smith returned to Bristol to spend Christmas with Edith Pegler. Because the inquest into Margaret's death had been held in London, it was covered by the national press, and the News of the World ran a story of the tragic bride drowned in the bath the day after her wedding. In his fruit farm in Buckinghamshire, Charles Burnham read the report, as did a William Hayes, a neighbour of the Crosley boarding house in Blackpool. He went round and showed the article to Mrs. Crosley, saying, "I bet this is that man Smith under a different name, the man whose wife drowned in your bath last year." When sent letters and cuttings from the newspapers, Scotland Yard sent Detective Inspector Arthur Neal to investigate the link between the similar cases. In January of 1915, the inquest returned a verdict of accidental death. A few days later, posing as John Lloyd, Smith went to the solicitors to sort out the will. From a pub opposite, Detective Inspector Neal kept watch on him, and did so for nearly a month as Smith tried to sort out the will and life insurance on his dead wife. On the 1st of February, as Smith left the solicitor's office, Detective Inspector Neal arrested him on a charge of making a false entry on his marriage certificate. As Smith sat in a jail cell, the bodies of the 3 women were exhumed and examined by Bernard Spilsbury, the Home Office pathologist. He concluded that the women would have been drowned by pushing their heads under the water. The detectives on the case interviewed more than 150 people across Britain who had known Smith. Then on March 23, 1915, Joseph Smith was formally charged with murder. He was to be tried at the Old Bailey, London. The trial opened on the 22nd of June 1915, with Mr. Justice Scruton presiding. Although the evidence was only circumstantial, the coincidence between the 3 drownings was the key factor, and at the end of the trial, the jury took just 22 minutes to find Joseph Smith guilty of murder, and on the 1st of July 1915, Smith was sentenced to death. On the 29th of July, he lost his appeal, and on the 13th of August 1915, he was led from his cell. A bag was placed over his head as he still protested his innocence, and then the hangman's noose was placed around his neck. The trapdoor opened. Joseph Smith was dead. The bath in which Margaret Lofty was drowned was acquired by Madame Tussauds and was displayed in the Chamber of Horrors, a chilling reminder of a murderous reign.